Hi, this is Nick Butler from the Charleston County Public Library, and I'm here in downtown Charleston on the east side of Alexander Street, just a few yards from the main branch of the Charleston County Public Library, and I'm standing next to a pillar that has a plaque from 1905 marking the spot of the Liberty Tree of South Carolina. It was here in the 18th century. You might remember that I mentioned the Liberty Tree last summer, in an episode about proclaiming or declaring independence in South Carolina in 1776. That's episode number 118 if you want to go back and review that. So on the 5th of August, 1776, there was a formal ceremony in Charleston, actually several formal ceremonies, where the Declaration of Independence, which had been signed and ratified in Philadelphia, was read aloud to the public on 3 different occasions here in downtown Charleston. One occasion on Broad Street at the west end, and then a second occasion on the steps of the Exchange Building at the east end of Broad Street. And then at 3 p.m. on August 5th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was read to a large public gathering in this neighborhood under the branches of a very large oak tree known as the Liberty Tree. So in the next few minutes, I want to tell you just a little bit about what the Liberty Tree was, and then talk a little bit about where the Liberty Tree might have been, because this is not the exact spot. So as the plaque tells us, in the autumn of 1766, Christopher Gadsden and a number of his kind of progressive-minded friends met and had dinner under a large oak tree here in a pasture that was known as Mr. Mazyk's pasture. And they came here to dine together and to discuss this radical idea of maybe declaring the colonies to be independent from Great Britain. So in 1766, that was a radical idea being talked about in this neighborhood under the Liberty Tree. So in that decade between the autumn of 1766 and 1776, there were a number of occasions when Christopher Gadsden and his like-minded friends, who called themselves the Sons of Liberty, and that phrase, Sons of Liberty, was used throughout the colonies in different communities where people with similar ideas got together. So we're talking about the Charleston area. Sons of Liberty gathered from time to time to discuss politics and various economic incentives to become independent from the mother country. And they dined here under the Liberty Tree. So when the Declaration of Independence was formally ratified in Philadelphia in 1776 and finally made it to Charleston in the early days of August 1776, this was a natural spot for it to be read. So at 3 p.m. on the 5th of August 1776, the government of South Carolina invited all the Continental soldiers in the area who had not already heard the Declaration of Independence being read aloud to come and gather here at the Liberty Tree. So at 3 p.m., Captain Barnard Elliott read aloud the Declaration of Independence in a strong voice for all to hear. And after him, a clergyman read a sermon suitable to the occasion, eyewitnesses tell us. We don't know exactly what that sermon was. But this was the 3rd place in South Carolina where the Declaration of Independence was read. And for that reason, and the decade leading up to the Declaration of Independence, the Liberty Tree was a special place for those people who considered them patriots of this new country that we were in the process of inventing in 1776. And for that very reason, when the British Army captured Charleston in May of 1780, they purposely cut down the Liberty Tree, a large oak tree that lay somewhere behind me. So after the American Revolution, there are no descriptions that tell us precisely where the Liberty Tree was standing. It was gone. It was, most of it, being burned up for firewood. There are a few people in the 19th century who talked about souvenirs made of remnants of the Liberty Tree, like a judge's gavel being made out of remnants of the Liberty Tree. But the stump was all that remained after the war. So I'm in the process of trying to do property research using the surviving records at the Charleston County Register of Deeds to see if I can pinpoint in whose parcel of land this Liberty Tree once stood. So as I mentioned earlier, all of this area was a pasture in the 18th century. From the 1690s to the 1790s, the Mazyk family, that for those of you who don't know much about South Carolina history, the Mazyks were French-speaking, kind of Franco-Flemish immigrants, French Protestants, who came to Charleston in the late 17th century. So this was Isaac Mazyk's pasture in the 1690s that he passed down to later generations. So Mr. Mazyk's pasture was subdivided in the late 1780s into smaller parcels. And by the 1790s, there were a few houses that began to spring up in this area. And in the process of subdividing the land and selling off the parcels and creating plats and descriptions, legal descriptions of those plats for the purposes of recording them in the deeds office, there are clues that I think can help us to pinpoint the location of the Liberty Tree. So we have some descriptions from the early 19th century of people who were alive in the late 18th century, early 19th century, describing where the stump of the Liberty Tree might have been. And they consistently describe, there are 3 or 4 descriptions that consistently say that the Liberty Tree was somewhere south of Charlotte Street, where I am now, and somewhere east of Alexander Street, which is behind me, the Cooper River being directly in front of me. And you'll notice Charleston County Public Library, the red brick building behind me as well. So we're in the approximate location, perhaps, of where the Liberty Tree was in the 18th century. And as you can see right now, this is a job site for a hotel that's going up. And some people in the community have come to me and said, well, aren't they covering up the side of the Liberty Tree with this hotel? No, I don't think they are, because this is closer to Calhoun Street. This actually would have been a very watery lot in the 18th and 19th century. So the Liberty Tree was a little bit farther north, closer to Charlotte Street, but again, somewhere east of Alexander Street. The key to trying to determine this location is to remember that East Bay Street, which is directly in front of me, did not exist until the early 1950s. So if these 19th century descriptions are saying the Liberty Tree was east of Alexander Street and south of Charlotte and somewhere closer, perhaps midway to the next street over, which was Washington Street, well then that puts it a little bit farther east, closer to the Cooper River. And in fact, that might be right where East Bay Street is today. So now we're standing on the east side of East Bay Street, and as you can see behind me, where we were just standing is in the distance, and you can see the red brick of the Charleston County Public Library's main branch in the far distance. So we know that the Liberty Tree was somewhere in this vicinity. It wasn't quite as close to Alexander Street as the plaque seems to kind of imply. It might have been closer to the east, to the Cooper River. So what we have to remember, as I was saying, is East Bay Street is an early 1950s phenomenon. There was nothing in the site except residential construction and large rectangular lots. So Charlotte Street is to my left and Calhoun Street is to my right. So when we think about the location of the 18th century Liberty Tree, we have to consider that it might have been this far east or somewhere in this general vicinity. So I'm on the trail of trying to find the exact location, or to get a little closer than we are now. And my hope is that in the month of June, I'll have a chance to go to the Charleston County Register of Deeds and do a little bit more research, so that by the time the Declaration of Independence is read aloud on the steps of the Exchange Building on July 4th, 2020, first thing in the morning, I will be able to tell the audiences that gather on that day that we have a better idea of where the Liberty Tree is. So that's my goal for the next few weeks, and I'm going to keep busy doing that. And in the meantime, keep listening to the Charleston Time Machine on the website of the Charleston County Public Library, and I'll see you in the future.